Good evening. I'm Jacqueline Sustaita, President of the Weslaco ISD Board of Trustees. This special board meeting is being conducted in compliance with the Texas Open Meetings Act. Notice of this meeting has been posted online for at least 72 hours. The board is meeting by the use of Google Meets and telephone transmission, which allows two-way communication for members of the public during public comments. A recording of this meeting is being made and will be available to the public at a later date. The time is now 5:44 p.m. and I call this meeting to order. I will now begin the roll call. I'll call each board member by name. Dr. Rodriguez, Coach Cuellar.
Here.
Ben Castillo.
Here.
Jesse Trevino. Mr. Nieto.
Here.
And Mark de los Santos.
Here.
Let the record show that a quorum of board members are in attendance. A quorum is not required for a board workshop. Number 2, public comments.
There are none.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 3, discussion on 2023 and 2024 board budget.
I will call on David Robledo.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And so, they're going to help me get onto the PowerPoint. And so everyone should have a paper copy of the PowerPoint. If there is a question as we kind of go through the slides, just feel free to just jump on in and just raise your hand and just ask your questions. This is probably going to be one of 4 workshops throughout this budget process. So the hope is that by the end of this, at least today's meeting, you'll have a better idea of how I like to present the budget. And as we have our monthly meetings, we'll be able to, hopefully by the month of June, the 3rd or 4th week of June, that we'll have something ready to adopt. So today's purpose is to, in a sense, talk about the requirements. So there is a reason why we have to do it a certain way. We will also be talking about the timeline. In other words, so to kind of give everyone a good idea of what's going to happen from when we first started this process back in our office in January to that point when we adopt the budget and also the tax rate. We will also be looking at the current process or the current status of our current budget. So that way you can just have an idea of how things are kind of coming along. We think about how do we get our funding, and the major fundamental way is by the number of students that actually come to school on a daily average, and that is how we get funded. So we'll be talking about our projections for students. We will also talk about the largest expense, which is really staffing. And so as we kind of see what we project what will be the number of staff, we also will talk about what type of pay raises that we want to entertain for next school year. So today, so when we start thinking about the budget for 22-23 school year, we kind of go back to see, well, what is the current budget? So if you were to remember, what was the financial report that we talked about back in January, we would see that we have $191 million as what I would like to call the official budget. What is the official budget for a school district? It's the same throughout all the other Texas school districts. It's our local, our state funds, and our food service fund. If we have debt that is paid through our interest and sinking, then we would also have our debt service fund. So every budget, we would pick on those 4 major groups. We have to adopt something for each one of those. And so, so that's at least a definition of what we will consider the official budget. There is other funds that we talk about, but those are our federal funds. Anything that starts with a 200, 300, or 400 fund, those are federal funds. And so those not necessarily have to be board approved. We do keep you in the loop, but at least we say that these are the ones that officially has to be approved by the board. out of the 191 million that the district is planning on earning this school year, 149, almost 150, is tied to salaries, whether it's stipends, their regular base, benefits. When you add all that up for those particular funds, 149 million is, in a sense, going to be spent throughout the year. Kind of do some quick math. That's about 78.3% of our budget. Yes.
Does the 149 million already include the proposed pay raises for next year?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
This is just a review for this year.
Okay.
We'll see how that kind of comes along next.
Okay.
But the norm or the rule of thumb is going to be 75%. And you kind of hear that
Right.
throughout from different administrators. So purely just looking at that from a high level, that just tells me there is a lot of funds tied into our personnel cost. That just means that there's less funds for everything else. And we'll kind of talk about that later on. But if I kind of zoom in into our 199 fund or our general fund, we see that about 72% is tied to our payroll cost. And so the other funds, for instance, our state comp, our state special ed, all the other state funds, they pick up the difference, the 27% of that. In our compensation plan, we break up all the different employees into 8 groups. So later on, we'll talk about those 8 groups when we talk about pay raises, but that's how we kind of break up how every employee gets paid or how they will get their increase. And so today we're kind of focusing on the revenue and our biggest expense, salaries. So what is required by the state or TEA or Texas Education Agency? Since we are now a July 1 school year, school district, we have to have a budget before July 1, so ideally June 30th or even earlier than that. So that is the plan, to have that ready and in place. So luckily, we are in the month of March. So that gives us about 3 to 4 months or really 3, to get to that point where we feel comfortable saying, this is what the budget's going to be, this is how we're going to project how our revenues, and this is how we plan to spend those funds. And again, the ones that we have to get board approved is going to be our general fund, our food service fund, and our debt service fund. If we had a bond, there would be something we would call a construction fund. That would also be another fund that we had to get approved. Currently, we don't have one of those, so that's why I'm not really going to make a mention for that. But there could be. And so some of the other little rules, and this is just more for FYI, every expenditure has to be adopted to a budget that the board approves. So in other words, I cannot spend on something that has not been board approved. That's why you hear something about budget amendments, is because monies are being allocated by function. The board needs to be aware if I'm going to make a change. So when we have our initial budget, that's when you first tell, or where the administration shares that information with the board, you approve it. Anytime I'm going to make a major change, I have to let you know. And so that's what that whole process is for.
Can I ask you something? That you
Yes.
said federal funds do not have to be board approved, correct?
They are, again, federal funds, no. It could always be brought up as a courtesy. I bring it up in our budget book. So one of the fun things we're going to see is something that I did do at my other districts. So we have what they call the official budget book, 20, 30 pages that tells you this is how we're spending our funds. We are going to be doing something bigger in our business office, which is what we kind of call the budget book. Same amount of pages as our audit, which is about 150 pages. You're going to get that information also about those federal funds. So even though it's not required, you're technically not approving it, but you're going to get that information anyways.
I think because the federal dollars also, they already come designated for certain
Right.
purposes, for programs, for resources, staff, et cetera. It's already all broken down and outlined for you. So if anything, maybe the board would just approve like contracted contracts, maybe with services and things like that, but.
So like we've been talking about ESSER. So that's,
Right.
again, a federal grant.
Yeah.
Right.
And so whenever we then go back to our processes, everything that's over 25,000, we go ahead and let you know. And so that's why you have those requests for proposals or bids for certain items that normally we wouldn't talk about. But because we're using federal funds and because of a certain dollar amount, we do come to get approval from you. And so one to remember would have been those playgrounds, the repairs. We're using federal funds. That's why we still brought it to the board for their approval. So, on our website, we actually share what was the budget, if you ever wondered, last year, 2 years ago. The budget book that we're going to be doing this year, it actually has at least 5 years of history, what our budget's going to be for next year, and 4 years of what the future will hold. And again, we don't know what is going to happen, but we try to project out at least that far. So that way you have 10 years of information. So those are some new things that we're going to be doing in our business office. One of the last things that we have to do is that we have to let TA know what was our original budget and what was our amended, the final budget by the time we do our audit book. And so that's just another requirement that we have to do. So if you ever wonder what's going to happen, and here's where we have budget number 1, which is today. Budget number 2 will happen probably in the month of April. Budget workshop number 3 will happen in May, with the final one happening in June. And so again, we're going to be talking about revenues and expenses, the largest expense. That's what the goal is for today. When we have our next meeting, we're going to talk about our major projects. A lot of those deal with facilities, building items. We are going to fine tune what we hope to bring for what are the pay raises. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but we're going to fine tune that item. When we talk about facilities, in a perfect world, you're going to hear that quite often. We always hope that we could actually fund those items with our current budget operations. But sometimes there's items that are just way too much that could be funded from our current, that we actually try to do it with a bond or some kind of debt service instrument. So you kind of already heard at the last board meeting from our superintendent's report that there is a long list of construction projects. We are anticipating somewhere around $80 to $90 million. I wish I had that in our budget. Something like that would normally be done through a bond. And so, again, we're going to have some information from our financial advisors, some information from us to kind of see how we could actually try to go for that type of deal. Budget workshop number 3, we would slowly start getting information from our tax office and the appraisal, the Hidalgo County Appraisal District, to kind of let us know what are the taxes that we would be able to assess on all the different values within the boundaries of Weslaco ISD. And the hope would be that we would be able to finalize what those pay raises would be, and then with the remaining funds, we would then allocate so much money to our campuses and departments. And so the hope would be that we would have a good number ready to share on how we're going to spend that $190 to $200 million for the next school year. In your backup, you should have a budget calendar that really details all the different items that's going on behind the scenes. And so, again, that is a living document. It will change, but at least that's kind of like what we hope to do, to have everything done by those dates. So when we try to look into the future, we're trying to see what is out there for next year. And so it's always going to be hard on an odd year. So we are in an odd year, 2023. The state legislature is meeting right now. And so they're kind of like changing how they do things budget-wise as they kind of try to figure out what do they want to do with all of their funds. And so one big question is that we are coming off, or some people still think that we're still in a pandemic. So during those years, the state helped school districts with that loss of funding that had occurred. They budgeted for that amount, but it didn't happen because of what all the different effects of the COVID pandemic had happened. So in the past, they did have what they call an ADA, or average daily attendance, hold harmless. They haven't said anything for this year. Again, will they do something? That's always a hope and that's out there. What about next year? What about the following year? Because in a sense, it's going to take about 5 years, and that's what they're kind of saying. We're in year 3. In my head, there's still 2 more years of the whole effects of COVID-19. And so will the state help school districts with that? And so one thing that we have to do is try to estimate how many kids are going to be enrolling in our school district. And then the harder one is, will they actually come to school? So we may have, and I'm totally making it up, 16,500 kids enrolled, and that's a great number to have. But if our ADA is only 12,000, well, that means they're not coming to school, which is bad because at that point, we are currently funded at an ADA rate, not an enrollment rate.
I'm glad you clarified that because I got a lot of comments
Yeah.
from saying, well, but our enrollment went up. Isn't that what the goal was? Why aren't we getting the money? But there's a difference between enrollment and ADA that some people were very confused about, saying, why are we not at the budget that we should have?
Yeah.
That's it right there. Thank you for clarifying that.
And so the state is the one saying, as of today, we will fund on ADA, the number of kids who actually come to school. There are some bills out there that are saying, hey, let's switch it up to enrollment. Again, will they have enough votes to move that to make that change? We'll know by the end of summer if it even makes it that far.
I kind of wanted to touch base on that too, because I know that when one of the first presentations Dr. Rivera made, we came on the paper, and they quoted that financial gap that we had. So I had told people Weslaco's in a unique situation because there's some districts that they operate at a level that's higher than their enrollment and ADA. Those are financial issues, that's just bad financial management. But in our situation, we have the kids, they're just not all showing up. I said, so it's kind of like, yes, it's an issue, but it's one I think that we can solve because it's more of an internal issue, dealing with parents, dealing with students, getting campuses, interventions, in line. So I want to let the public know, because they said, well, you all have a $10, $15 million home. Well, technically, yes, but we have the students. We just got to figure out how to work with parents and get them into the classrooms every single day enough that we're getting funded for them as well. I said, so that's kind of where we're in a unique situation, I think.
Exactly. So what's happening, you have, if we were looking back 2018, we would remember those ADA rates of, at a high school, we're at 95%, we're 96. Our middle schools are doing a little bit better, 96, 97, but our elementaries were, 97 or higher ADA. Today, we're about 92. And then even some of those kids that are coming, we don't get fully funded. Again, that's totally okay. But from a 95, 96 to a 92, we are losing those funds.
Right.
And that is, primarily because of the pandemic. Because when you get sick, we tell them, no, stay away, but get online.
Right.
But it has been something that's been going on. And every district has been kind of feeling those effects of the COVID effect on attendance. But then that's where we had hope for that the TEA would have that hold harmless. In other words, fund us at an ADA that was kind of like pre-pandemic. They already budgeted the monies for that. That's why they have a huge surplus at the state level. So we're saying, where is our part? Because in a sense, they already have that money set aside for us. And that's a whole other conversation there. So just a reminder, even though this should not be a shock, next year is the last year of ESSER. So again, federal government knew that because the kids are not here, we are going to have less funding. There's new costs that are happening because of this pandemic. new softwares, new interventions, new things to get our kids back to normal in a whole lot of different ways that we never had to worry about. And so they had projected that within 3 years, we should be back to normal. Will that occur? That's a whole other thing. But funding-wise, they've only given us money up to September 2025. And so, or September 24, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm giving everyone. But there's going to be things that worked great because of this new monies that came in. There's going to be programs, softwares, all these other things that, in a sense, it worked. And we want to continue that. So how are we going to fund that? And so those are going to be some other questions that, are we going to just say anything that had ESSER tied to it, we're just going to turn it off? Or, you know what, this was a good thing. We need to continue. And so that's where I'm giving Mr. Garlic over there heart attacks sometimes, saying, hey, we need to fund this either using state comp or Title I, because a lot of the funding that we have in local funds, you'll find out it's going to go back to salaries. So these great programs are going to need some kind of funding. And so we're hoping the state will do something to help with us with that too. And just another reminder, $80 million of unfunded projects that we're trying to see that is in the pipeline that needs to happen. And so we'll have some more meetings on that. So how we get our revenue? Again, it's not an enrollment, but I'm picking on enrollment because that's a good indicator of the maximum money that we can receive. So again, it's nice to see what it was before pandemic, during pandemic, and what we project out for next school year. So back in the day, 2020, 2021, actually it kind of was very similar to nothing changing, meaning there was a zero increase, but again, the year before, 2019, and you don't really see it here, but if you see that little line graph, that is the percentage change. So the first year of my little schedule, 4.2% decrease. So technically, back in 2018-19, we were at 17,000 kids enrolled in the district. We haven't hit 17 yet, again, and that's already what I'm projecting now for 23-24, this next school year. So again, 16,000 is what we had in year 20, 16,500 again in 21. Now the effects of COVID hit. We dropped 1,000 kids. It's kind of like saying we lost the middle school. We lost 2 elementaries. We lost half a high school. I mean, that's one way to think of it. And then the great thing happened. We were able to bounce back. 22-23, we're back to the number again, 16.5. Now that's enrollment. I'm not necessarily saying that that's the same what happened ADA-wise. What we're hoping for next year is that there will be still another great year of recruitment and retention, that we would be able to hopefully bump our numbers up at least 2%. That's what I'm hoping is the minimum. I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping it's going to be another 5.8% increase. But budget-wise, we're always going to be conservative. We're saying about 2%. And so you have in your backup a copy of the enrollment by campus, by grade level. It has the past 4 years of data plus the projected next year. That way you could just have it where did 16,825 come from? Just a little side notes on those numbers. We are predicting or projecting that the majority of that increase is going to come from the little ones. Your pre-K3, your pre-K4, with the great partnerships that we have with the Head Start program, with having all the good kids coming from IDEA who now closed their program. We're hoping to say, you know what, that's something that the district chose to keep this program the way it is. and just to expand it to be even better.
I have a question on the ADA. I know that we have like the SASE program and all those other programs that help us to recuperate the numbers for ADA. When will we have a estimated, or when will we know how much that's going to bring in?
So for us, we always wait for TEA. So the
Okay.
TEA, we always give what they call 4 submissions through our PEIMS department. We let TA know so much for our budget, for the audit book, for the staff, and the students. And so in the updates of those 4 submissions, one of them does talk about the SASE program or the optional flexible school day program. Usually I've seen the funding come to the district in April for the previous year.
Oh,
So we're in March. Next month, we're hoping to see that whatever had occurred in the 22 or 21-22 school year, we should be seeing those numbers come in. And so it takes a long time, but we know it comes in.
okay.
And so we talked about all where the monies are coming from, meaning they're coming from the students. Our biggest expense is staffing. And so just again, I like to show history. And so when we go back to 2020, the number of staff was 2,295. We call them FTEs or full-time equivalents. Think of it as just kind of like an average of people. And it actually reduced from the year before. We reduced it by 40 staff members. Now, what you always hope for is that however your students are coming, that your staff kind of follow that same trend. So again, we kind of had that big drop in because of COVID. So 21 and 22, we do see those effects. Because remember, we had lost 1,000 kids in enrollment. The staffing has to change with that. And the district did do a good job there. The 22-23, my last column of actuals, we're still tying those numbers with our HR department. We are still kind of anticipating that same type of fine tuning, I guess we could call it, to the number of students that we have. Some of the things that we are doing that's in the background is that we are planning on seeing where our staff could be funded appropriately. And so if it is allowable through either a federal program or our state programs and not necessarily have to be paid out of local funding, well, then we're gonna make those changes. And so one thing that we also talk about is that these numbers do not include our vacancies. And so as we kind of project for the future, that is one thing that I will be working with our HR department to see, okay, even though we have 2,200 staff members on payroll, there may be a few that are, in a sense, in a vacant position, or we have a full-time sub filling in for a teacher. So those are some of the numbers that we'll fine-tune. Luckily, we will share all that information with TASB so that when we get our staffing study, the salary study, that they will have the good numbers, I guess you could say, for that. This is not set in stone, but I just kind of want to make sure that at least I'm going in the right direction. So when we start thinking about those 8 categories, remember from earlier, these are the different categories. We have our teachers, librarians, nurses. That's one category. Our educational administrative professional group, our business administration group, our clerical and technical, our auxiliary, our bus driver, instructional support, and our administrative assistant. So those are the 8 groups that we currently have in our compensation plan. Every year, we could always revise that or change it up a little. That is something that TASB will do with our HR department. One of the things I did want to just kind of refresh your memory, last year's pay increase was $1,700, or kind of like with like a 3% increase for the staff. Now, these percentages or numbers don't include those entity adjustments or those equity implementations. I mean, all those different add-ons. We're kind of like not talking about that yet. This is just like the base increase. Just to kind of give you an idea, what we're kind of thinking of, at least to provide numbers for the next board workshop, is what would a Model 1 or a Model 2 would look like? Meaning, if it was a 2% increase, what would that come out to? How about a 2.5%? At least I could give numbers so that you have an idea as to what that will come out to. And so,
If you don't mind, Madam Board President, what I would like to see is how much, and specifically for teachers, how much do we spend on teachers? And then the other parts of the functions of the budget, like how much do we spend on professional development? How much do we spend on curriculum?
that will be number 2 meeting.
But I want to be able to compare that so we could determine, well, maybe we should take money out of how much we're spending on professional development and give it to the teachers. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because to me, $1,250, I mean, that's $60 a month increase. You know what I mean?
So some of the good things to remember is that this is not the only compensation piece for next year. And so I purposely put on the side is the ESSER retention stipend. So in addition to, and I'm just making it up just for our story, Model 1, $1,250 for a teacher, that's not the only increase that they'll be seeing, at least in their paycheck. They will be also getting the $2,000 stipend along with that. So it's a combination of those two items being what the total increase would be for next year.
Does, I think it does, but refresh my memory, you might have kind of a better idea. Does the $2,000 ESSER stipend count towards their TRS calculations?
Since this is, let me just pick on Mr.
I think it might because everybody's getting it.
Yeah. The way TRS works is that if you have to earn like wages, and that's how TRS is actually being taken out.
Yeah, extra duty pay, yes, but not a stipend. I don't think a stipend is.
And so that's what I'm believing. So stipends, you're not working extra for it.
Right.
So they would not be TRS eligible. But like, for instance, if there was a program like after school tutorials, that it is funded by ESSER, let's say, then those would be.
Those wages go toward it,
Yeah.
for the extra duty pay.
So what's our starting pay in Weslaco?
For a teacher?
53,
50.
53, somewhere around there.
53,500.
What's the highest paid in the valley? Do you know?
We will find out when TASB does their study.
I think the last time I saw in the paper was La Jolla, right?
It's always going to be in Hidalgo County where I've seen that that's where the competition is.
But I also want to mention too that La Jolla also is going to have a staffing reduction of about 300.
They've been in the news, sad to say, for their
One goes with the
closing
other,
of schools and things of that nature. All those comparisons will be part of the TASB study. They likely will show about 10 districts that are comparable to Weslaco, and they'll show where do we fit. A lot of times they like to pick on our neighbors, but we also like to see what other
But
comparable.
one thing I have an issue with those TASB salary studies, and I sit through a whole bunch of them. When it comes to administrators, they compare the market statewide. But when it comes to teachers, they compare it just here. And can we get a market statewide for teachers? Because teachers are just as mobile as administrators, especially nowadays with teacher shortages and everybody trying to recruit. I mean, you see billboards all over the place. Come work in Dallas ISD, come work in Austin ISD. It's kind of the same thing. So I want to be able to pay market of the state, or at least for us to compare what the market is of the state, as opposed just to the area.
Taking notes?
And TASB's going to push back on you because I've heard other board members ask this question, but tell them you don't care. We want to see it.
And we had a meeting and we discussed it with the previous administration that it was going to be, I think, well, you weren't here, but it was a 2 or 3 year, he had like a 2 or 3 year plan or something like that to slowly increase the teacher pay scale. so that we would be, I mean, the goal was to, I mean, I want to say it out loud, right, because then you get people upset, but the goal was, yes, one, to be the highest, but two, to try to get everybody toward a $60,000 mark, which was like shooting high. Like, let's shoot for the heavens, try to see how fast we can get there. But then it was also, well, let's see how the year turns out, and let's see how ADA comes in, and enrollment hit, but obviously ADA is not where anywhere it needs to be.
To start at 60,000 and to account for compression, right, increasing everybody, your 1,042 teachers, it'd be around $8 million bucks. You spend $8 million, or we spend $8 million a year on professional development and curriculum.
We don't.
Well, that's what's budgeted function by function.
Luckily, I ran a report and I've shared we're about a 1.5 million.
Well, that's how much is budgeted, that's posted on our website, because that's where I got that info. Function.
That is sharing salaries and
Salaries.
other items. It's not just like
Professional
trainings.
Yeah, trainings.
Well, it's professional development and curriculum, the way that it's posted.
Yeah, they merge it together. I asked that too. They put staffing and they put staffing, salaries, and development together. So
Exactly.
it's mixed. Yeah.
Well, let's get
Be a
a,
better breakdown.
Yes.
let's get a number of how much we spent on curriculum and professional development. I mean, because we know we spent 700,000 on one program, right, that nobody's using. So that's $1 million bucks right there.
So some of the things that we've been doing, and luckily our superintendent kind of gave us a little heads up, is to say, well, how much have we been doing for those PD, professional development? I guess I'm just call just training. Again, whether it's locally funded or a good chunk of that is done out of our state and federal funds. So it goes back to what was the plan on those grants and everything. But yeah, I mean, if we're able to knock mine to zero, that's even better. But I think if I remember right, the whole grand total was like only about 1.5 million of just true, like calling a consultant to do a training, or we go to a training for professional development.
You know, touching on Trustee Castillo, you know, he brought up a good point. Last year fall, this current past fall, there was a software that was purchased that really nobody's using, right? That's a lot of money that's sitting there. But have we done a study on, sometimes softwares get away from us because this department wanted a software, this other department wanted software. There's, you know, campuses, principals, directors, programs, et cetera. And then at the end of the day, there's so many softwares, not enough lab time, not enough rotations, that they're not even getting used, but we're paying yearly licenses. I'm sure that if we were to look at those and really start to kind of filter through them, you'd probably save a significant amount of money.
Have you guys done that, like a survey or some kind of a list? This is what we do, this is what we don't
Or just
use?
usage, technology could find usage on there, sees how like campuses or kids are logging on, when they're logging on, how long they're logging on.
Yeah, we work with curriculum.
Yeah.
So on my calendar, so I'm going to reference it. Again, this is just my part. Again, I'm still going to be meeting with the funding sources. So February 22nd, which hasn't happened yet, so that date didn't happen, but it's on my to-do list.
Right.
A meeting with curriculum instruction and funding sources to review the allocation of funding for programs and software. Exactly what we just said, that there is some softwares that are good, every one of them needs to be evaluated.
Right.
Keep the good, the bad ones, you let it die, or was it implemented correctly? Was it given its true chance to survive? That's a whole other discussion, but that's on my to-do list.
Well, I think our funding goals need to be not, let's spend this much money on curriculum or whatnot. Our funding goals need to be more aligned. Let's give as much as we can to our teachers. Because our teachers, I mean, in every organization, payroll's the most expensive thing. And it doesn't matter the school district, law firm, whatever, you're only as good as your employees. So if you want the best, you got to pay for the best, right? So, you know, I think that our money is better spent in high pay for teachers.
And there are softwares that, for example, I'm just going to bring one of the examples that happened up this year in December with the whole AR program and accelerated reader. Teachers, we want to pay them and take care of them, but they also love some of the softwares that they use. And this was going to be taken away from them, and we were purchasing other softwares that we weren't using. So this is where the trust comes in from, I think, from us as the board to tell, from you guys as administrators to tell us what is it that the teachers need to make their jobs easier, things that are going to be beneficial for the kids, and this is where the trust comes in. Because when I see a board agenda and I see, oh, we're going to buy this, I don't know, copy or some whatever software, okay, well, they must need it. That trust comes in, and then to find out that we're getting rid of something they really do use, like the AR. So those softwares are really important. I see what you're saying, take care of the teachers, but also we want the softwares that they do use.
It's a whole combination.
And I want to say two things, 2 points I'm gonna make real quick. And one, I've been here 2 years, and we've been through different administrations, and we've been through different discussions and a forensic audit and all kinds of stuff, right? So we've been looking at numbers, but when you look at the budget, it's kind of going back to like what Trustee Castillo was saying. When you look at the budget, and I said it too as far as teacher pay, but I want to touch that on my second point, but when you look at the budget for so long, my question was like, how are they making it work? How are they getting through this and floating through this? Because I would look at the numbers, I had questions, I had meetings with a person and maybe the superintendent at the time, say, okay, how is this even operating, or how are we getting through with just the way things were? And realistically, what you were doing is you were making it float, you were making it work because you were not fully investing where you should have, kind of going back to the classrooms, teacher pay, teacher resources. You had a lot of individuals come out and saying, hey, we're not updating our furniture, we're not keeping up with maintenance on our facilities, we're lacking educational resources in different aspects, from textbooks to computers, furniture, et cetera, things, schools and classrooms that weren't renovated. We heard all these things as we came in, and then you start to see it. Well, yeah, the monies weren't allocated there, because you're trying to float all this other things that weren't really making an impact on the classroom, that you were kind of neglecting this one. That's the way I saw the budget. That's my opinion on how I saw the budget. That's how you were floating it. You were taking away from where it counted the most to sustain everything else that wasn't really that much of an impact that needed. Our audit even showed it, that we had a structure and staffing and things like that that had pretty much minimal to zero impact on our students' education. So I agree, and I said it from the beginning, our teachers should be one of probably the highest paid in the valley. That should be our goal to get there, so that then we can turn around. It's not a one-way street. Then we turn around and say, okay, now our community wants you to be the best in the classroom. They want those scores. We don't want to be approaches. We don't. We want to be meets or exceeds. That's it. And approaches, that's unacceptable. And that's when we turn around and our community can say, we're paying you what you wanted to get paid. You're getting that market value statewide, whatever the case may be, but it's this or nothing else. And it's a two-way street. We're going to pay more, and he's right. Mr. Castillo's right. And then at that point, that's when the district says, this is what we expect from all of our classrooms. So.
And along that line, having been involved with the educational process for many, many years, we also take into account the support group, or their professionals, and everyone that's a part of the puzzle, because they're all equally as important to make things better for our students. So when we talk about taking care of our staff, we want to include everyone in some way, form, or fashion, because they all have to keep up with the cost of living. And as you well know, every day, just to get from here to there will cost you an arm and a leg. So just something to consider, because I think it's good for morale more than anything else. And when everybody's happy, good things are going to happen.
So one of the things that we're going to do as we kind of go through this whole budget process is, at least this is how I've done it. You're going to see how we come together and say, hey, I have, and I'm just making this up, $200 million. That's more likely what's going to be for next year. That's if nothing really changes at the state level. We're hoping that the state level will do what they had done with House Bill 3, I think that was like 4 years ago, where they told us, hey, you're going to get a lot of money, but all that money has to be given to staff. And then they told us how to do it. 70% for the teachers, 30% for everybody else, and then you kind of figure out the rest. I foresee something like that happening again. Because again, you hear we have $26 billion in the rainy day fund, and additional money that's going to be now need to be spent. Everyone's going to be fighting for it. Transportation, healthcare, well, school districts also. We're hoping that some of that fund, the extra funding, to be given to us, and then more likely they'll tell us, this is where we want you to spend the money.
Well, I think
for
that's all good
safety.
and well, right? And we'll take any money we could get from the state, but I just think if we could change our mindset that our goal is We need to take care of our teachers. We need to take care of our support staff, all those folks, because that has, like Trustee De Los Santos says, that has the most impact in the classroom. And that's, I mean,
And
the
so-
kids and the parents are our customers, right? That's direct contact.
So the big thing is that we have 200 million. We just cut it up into smaller pieces. That's all it really a budget is. And so right now we're saying 76% is already going to go to staff. If we want to have more, that's totally great. I'll get that direction from the superintendent.
Well, we're only as
Then
good as our
we're just
teachers,
going
my
to
friend.
cut from other programs. And so there's a lot of ways to make it work, but know that there is a kind of like a seesaw effect. We give more money to salaries, well, then there's going to be less money for programs. And we already see that happening because you just made a comment that I'm going to tag along. How did the district get to having $80 million worth of repairs and maintenance items? That doesn't happen from one year to the next. That had happened over 5, 10, 15 years. And so, yeah, you were able to pay for salaries, but at the expense of facilities.
But we have a plan B for that.
And so, I'm sorry?
We have a plan B for the facilities.
Which is the bond.
Right.
And so, but that's what was happening. You were funding programs or people. I'm just here to share how it's being done.
I think for me, speaking as a former teacher myself, yeah, raises and stipends are great. But if you're going to give me what I need for my classroom to teach my kids, and if you're going to give me the resources that I need, if you're going to give me the materials that I need as a teacher to teach my kids, I'm going to do it regardless. Yes, we all like stipends and we all like raises. Of course, that helps. But supplying our teachers with what they need is also very, very important. And that's why Yes, I agree with Ms. Trustee Castillo and the rest of the board, but I also want to put an emphasis on those resources and that those are very, very important for teachers.
Exactly. So how do we pay for this increase? So if we say, and just to make my story easy, 2%, and I'm totally making this up, let's pretend it was 2 million. It's not 2 million, but just to make my story easy. How are we going to get there? We are hoping that we have more kids come to the district. That's going to cover some of that. It's not going to cover all of it. And so again, I'm back to my piece of cake or pie or a pizza. I have to cut it a different way. And so some of the things that we are looking into is, again, the reorganization of staff. Can 2 people do the job of 1 and still adequately pay them? And in a sense, we're just trying to be more efficient. Some of that may happen. Department consolidations. What you never want to do, kind of, is to go through a RIF, a reduction in force. What you always hope is that you make your small little changes small along the way. And another word for using that is a reduction through attrition. In other words, a person leaves, we evaluate that position. Can it be done by somebody else? Or, you know what, let me get somebody, I'm just gonna put it, less expensive to fill that position. Or we get to close it. So there is gonna be reviews of all those positions throughout the district. Free spending where possible. Again, we're in March already. You had the budget since July 1. It's 9 months down the road. The hope is that you already spent the money for what you need it for. What we don't want to happen, and I'm going to step on some toes, I need to buy toner because I don't want to lose the money. I don't want to buy a whole bunch of paper. I'm going to, in other words, stockpile. A little is okay. I'm not saying not to do it. But if the funds could be used for something else, that's going to be something that would ideally be.
Now, usually like in late spring, I can't remember from the previous springs here, but usually late spring, districts will consolidate, like you said, consolidate funding, say, hey, principals, sorry, you didn't use it, we're consolidating. Same scenario?
Yes, we're doing that here.
We do that here. Mr. Garlick sends an email to remind for federal funds and state funds. I think our office is sending it for, really, May should be your last spending month.
Right.
Kind of like after spring break is a good time period where we switch gears into testing, graduations, and so on. The teaching is already kind of done.
Right.
In that sense. There's teaching every day, I'm not.
Right.
But the ideal by April,
Right.
that kind of spending should be a minimum.
Complete.
To do efficiency studies, we're already doing one, which is the salary study. A possibility would be a staffing study, and that's always something that we could think of next year. Utilize bond proceeds to take care of those big, high-dollar projects. Even looking at our health insurance premiums. And so, again, there's a lot of ways to, in a sense, squeeze some money, so I could give more money to, like, for instance, for pay.
But I don't want to squeeze it from the employees, I want to squeeze it from other areas.
Yeah, and so that's what we're going to show. We're going to try to show all these different ways, because what I hope to do, and we'll have it for the next meeting, I have increase of revenue, increase of expenses because of salary increases, and it's $2 million. This is what we're going to do to make it balance again. And so take a little bit here, take a little bit of there, and to hopefully get a balanced budget.
And that's the plan that we have. We want to reduce the current budget. Reduce it for next year also, through attrition. And I know right now we're overstaffed in some areas. So we're going to reduce the budget. And, I hear all of you, and I agree with all of you. The plan is to make sure the programs don't suffer, but we're able to go ahead and increase the amount for teachers. Model 1 and Model 2, right now I'm saying is going to be higher than what's here. But it can give us a chance to go back and look and study and move, and we'll come back with better numbers at the next meeting. But again, the key is to reduce the current budget, and we are. We have staff members at the early college, that right now there's, how many, about 20-some total?
Yeah, about 22.
Yeah. So that's savings, right? Because those 22 are going to go into where we have vacancies throughout the district. So there is going to be a big reduction of staff in that manner.
But not reduction of people, but reduction of positions.
Right.
Exactly, exactly. We're going to reduce the budget.
Filling and closing.
Yes.
So if I could just state this comment, a budget is a board set of priorities. If you look at any district's budget, that shows you what a district values. And I just think that, one of our budgeting goals, one of our values should be, we need to take care of the people who have direct contact with our kiddos.
I agree 100%.
So we will talk again in April. And so,
Okay, next slide.
All right, thank you very much.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. He's got you through?
Any other
That's it.
questions, concerns, discussion? Okay,
Good
thank
job.
you. Mr. Robledo, we'll move on to item number 4, which is the presentation and discussion of the forensic audit, the Weaver report.
Good evening, Dr. Rivera, Mrs. Sustaita, and members of the board. I'll be presenting this evening on the Tidwell Weaver, the report in reference to human resources. I'm the one reporting on it based on the timeline of the report itself. So again, what I shared tonight, please realize that Mrs. Rodriguez and I and our team is collaborating on this. It's not just me. Again, however, due to the timeline of the report, I'm the one that gets to be here with us this evening.
Lucky you. Hey, on these recommendations by Weaver and Tidwell, can you tell us whether they've been implemented or not after you present them?
I can. So basically, Mr. Castillo, and again, that's what we have here. So having the blue ink is what we are currently implementing in reference to the recommendations that we received. So I'll just kind of go over them. I'm not going to read it to you verbatim, but I will just kind of summarize each one if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
So basically, the first one that they were asking in a recommendation is if we were going to have to move away from the candidate that was being recommended for the position, why? So now currently our packets have, if we do not go with the first recommendation as we bring to the superintendent and then again to the trustees, there is an explanation why. So that's currently in our packet. If we can't go with our first recommendation or again what the committee is doing, then we do bring it to you in that nature. Second part talks about cross-training of personnel in human resources. Currently at this time, we've turned over almost every individual that was working in the HR department in the last 12 to 14 months. Current personnel is working with their new job, but as they are getting trained on their current positions, we are also working to make sure that we are cross-trained. So again, I guess sometimes you'll hear the term, so we don't have a single point of failure, right? We have numerous people that can complete the jobs that we have. So again, current personnel are learning their new jobs, but they are being working on cross-trained with them. Third recommendation. So the third recommendation is in reference to the calculation of pays and increases. Please realize that postings are prepared by the HR specialist, but then they are verified by the human resources administrator, basically at this time our assistant superintendent at HR, Mrs. Rodriguez. Personnel district has contracted though with TASB, as we went through with the salary study, to make sure that our pay increases do model what we need. And again, once the board approves the budget, and then the compensation specialist always verifies all raises and everything that goes out.
I don't think that that's what this is talking about. I think this is talking about when employees are singled out and given a raise, and it's recommending a check and balance on that.
Okay, so again, for us though, everything that does goes through our compensation plan. It has to be in the
Yeah,
compensation
no, but,
plan.
yeah, I understand what you're saying, but you could increase somebody mid-year within the compensation plan, because there's ranges, right? So,
Right.
What's it called? Pay,
The minimum.
there you go, the minimum,
Midpoint and max.
Yeah, midpoint, there you go.
Yeah, that was a big discussion we had with HR before about how was it being calculated and the methodology.
So, and we follow the rules of the compensation plan though, anytime that we do.
But what this is requesting is some kind of check and balance when that happens.
Okay.
Some kind of sign off on it, not just following your compensation plan.
Like, for example, if you go with, I'm gonna bring this up again, Model 1, a 2% increase for education administrative professionals. If we do that calculation, that yearly, who checks, oh, this is a 3% and we added it to this salary? Who does that?
So currently, well, we would have with our previous, the compensation specialist would, but now I know we work it through with Mrs. Rodriguez. We have a consultant that's there, that's working with us, Mr. Riojas, excuse me.
Okay.
And then again, they are checked. A lot of it is done through the computer programs and things that we utilize.
And the employees, I know they get at the end of the year, whenever they sign, those who are on contract, they get those, breakdowns of this is what you made, your base and your stipends.
Correct.
They are getting that information also
So
still?
So when you begin your contract, you are receiving your salary notification letter. Is that what you're
Right, that's what
alluding to?
yes, I'm talking
Yes.
about when you
So we
renew
begin,
it.
so basically salary notification goes out prior to your first paycheck that comes in with the new fiscal year.
Yeah.
Maybe what we could do, I mean, it is up to the board, but after that is all verified, you could just have an item on the agenda just certifying that everybody's getting paid what they're supposed to be getting paid and bring it to the board.
We can do that.
There was, one of the previous reports, there was like a 20-something individuals in the district that they had seen that were getting paid way above their, I guess, pay scales
Max.
but then nobody ever followed up with us again. The superintendent at the time never followed up again or said what, they were trying to figure out what they were gonna do, whether they were gonna, it was a mistake on HR's end, or if it was gonna be, hey, you have to pay this back because you were getting paid inappropriately for so many years.
I believe are you in referencing, Mr. De Los Santos, those that were being paid above the max? Is that what you're?
It was
referencing?
20,
Yes.
he told the
Yeah.
board one time that there was like 20, he told us all. that
Yeah,
There was
this is
20-something.
cap and they were above
20-something
the max.
individuals that they had found, when the whole thing came out about the compensation, the upload, right? The upload, that compensation upload, and the raises, and that was incorrect. That was gonna be incorrectly uploaded. When he reviewed everything, he said, hey, I also found out A, B, C, and D. And one of the categories was, there's a group of individuals that are getting paid above their what they're supposed to be getting paid. And he said it was significant, and that they were trying to figure out what they were gonna do, what course of action, and whether there was gonna be a repayment plan or something. But then it just went away, and we never kind of came back to it.
We'll follow up with that. We'll follow up with it.
I believe Dr. Rivera provided some information on those individuals at the last board meeting, and he's following up with it alongside.
Oh, with those?
HR. Yeah,
From the,
some of them.
Yeah. I remember that one.
okay.
If I may continue.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Other recommendations came out in reference to job descriptions. So what we are currently, as a practice, all posted vacancies have an updated job description. All new personnel obviously receive that updated job description. And now we are working on a process where job descriptions are reviewed every 3 years by departments. So again, it's not just one massive undertaking, but we're going to try to phase that in. Because again, some of them are in need of being updated. And you can think of it at times, if you want to look at it this way, you can have a teacher that if we're talking about teachers, some of our teachers have been with us and are very experienced. Well, they signed a teacher job description, but when they started, right? Because at the time. So again, if you went back and looked, you could have some that have 30-year-old job descriptions. So that's why we're currently working through those. But again, that is something that is phased in over time. But that's how you'd see it.
So it would be true to say that a majority of our job descriptions have not been updated in 5 years anymore, or is that still the case?
No, I would say that's not the case, because anything that's gone forward from when this was come forward, all job descriptions for anyone that was new, any positions that were put in place that were new, or anyone that's coming in, those are updated.
Awesome.
But what you'd get, Mr. Castillo, is we haven't gone back and said again, for example, we've got this teacher that signed on in the district in 1995, and they're still continuing a teacher. Their job description would be from when they originally.
I don't think those are the ones that we got to worry about. It's all like central office and, things like that. Those are the job descriptions.
Those are the ones. Anything that we post or anything that has an updated job description.
So let me ask you, so I think I've asked Mr. Castillo, because maybe it might be a legal question, I'm not sure. But if a new position is created, it should come
With a new job.
by the board, but the board should approve this new created position so it can be posted on the compensation
Correct.
plan, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because
and that's why at times you'll see we've done updates with the compensation plan. We kept
Right.
bringing it back if there was anything that we were going to add to it. But yes, we can't just summarily just go and place a position in the
Okay,
compensation
'cause
plan.
I know that there have been instances this year. I'm not saying that this person, that person, but I believe hearing from previous admin that new positions were created. We never saw job duties, we never saw what these were, there was just, here's the new position. So I really want to go over that for this year to see, because they were not in the compensation plan when we started in the beginning of the year.
But the final approval always comes to the superintendent, by any new position or any
Right,
job description.
right, so the
Yes.
previous superintendent,
Okay.
I'm talking about,
Okay.
not Dr. Rivera. I would like to look at what positions were created this year, because I know that there might have been some that the board, it didn't come by the board.
Okay.
Okay. As we move on, so one of the questions, or one of the recommendations, that came up in reference to it was pay increases and ensuring the methodology, which we had kind of alluded to a bit earlier. So again, objectives of the board, I think, Mr. Castillo, you had referenced, the objective is with pay earlier, but we're recommending additional clarity is what they're asking. So again, pay raises now are administered as described in the compensation plan. Additionally, this is our second year in a row, now compensation plan is published so everyone can see it. So again, that's how we are kind of being more transparent with that. Recommendation number 6 that they talked about was in reference to travel allowance stipends for staff. I can tell you that practice has been discontinued. There are no more travel allowances. Again, people can still apply to mileage if it takes a part of their job or it required, but no one has a built-in stipend into their travel allowance. Additionally, there's a question here on a recommendation for an updated organizational structure. Our organizational structure was updated in May of '22. It is currently under revision even as we go. So again, we are working with the organizational structure.
And I plan to bring that to the board in March, for the board to see the new plan.
Okay.
as I continue. So it talked about having an oath of confidentiality for those on interviewing committees. Standard practice now that all interviewing committees, we are signing an oath of confidentiality from the level here at central office all the way down to the campus level. That is a portion of it.
Can you include the interviewees as well?
The interviewees,
Yeah.
we could.
Because that's how everybody finds out who applied and who got interviewed and who didn't. They talk amongst themselves.
People share.
Yeah.
People share. All right, continued. As we looked at it, talked about hiring checklists. We now utilize hiring checklists throughout HR and throughout our onboarding to make sure that we quote unquote dot I's and cross T's. In addition to that, required trainings are documented now through Eduphoria, which again, we ask that everyone has those, you have to sign in, and we work towards getting required trainings. And again, it's always an ongoing process to keep it updated.
If I can ask you a question, I believe we had been talking as a board about the systems where, was it Sky Forward, or what is that system where everyone's online, somehow we all, you guys, not us, have access, what is that called?
Were you talking about Skyward?
There we go,
Skyward.
Sky Forward, Skyward. Have we looked in, are we doing any of that?
I can give you just a brief update, right? So there was a point that we had brought an item to the board, or I shouldn't say brought, we had placed it on the agenda. At the time, it was tabled.
Right.
Oh, that's
Yes,
right.
that was in
that's
December.
right.
Right, so it was tabled. However, we are currently looking at our current system, which is Alio, that we use.
That's right.
So
Okay.
we are currently looking at trying to get some more modules activated. I believe we have a slide that will, and I don't believe, there's a slide that will be presented to the trustees on the 27th at the regular meeting, that we think we can utilize some of the modules in a better manner, get some of them activated for a much, much better price than what was going to be presented in December.
Right.
Okay.
Again, it's going to come down to the utilization, right?
Right.
So there's always intent, and then there's always how we execute that intent, right? So we need to get those modules we need to get them activated, but then it's how we're going to utilize them also. But we think we can do that for a far better price to the district, and that would help with a lot of this right here, I can't tell you. So again, everything that we do, onboarding, all of that still has a checklist. There's a recommendation came out in reference to how do we know who is signing contracts or who hasn't signed contracts. This past May, we utilized electronic contracts. Number one, besides making trees very happy across this country, because I can't tell you how much paper we would go through with paper contracts, we were far better with knowing who signed and who didn't. To the point, then again, do not think that we are callous in any of our behavior. We did reach back out to individuals on an individual basis, right? To say, hey, for whatever reason, you did not go back through and electronically sign. So we did verify, but it allowed us to do that for the first time ever. And again, we plan on, continuing this practice as we move forward.
Okay.
It was very helpful to all of us indeed. Last part that we have there. So in reference to evaluations matching job descriptions, again, this continues to go, as we mentioned, with job descriptions. Then we continue to update our evaluations in all areas, right? From teacher, for administrator, teacher, all the way down to our non-professional staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buttimer.
Let me make one comment here. No, Mr. Butterman. When I came in 2 months ago on the salaries, and I shared it with the board, we had 3 stories that I gave you all in closed session. But when I came in, what I saw was that everyone in the district had received a pay increase, but some on the same pay grade received more than others.
Correct.
And why that happened, I don't know. But we're trying, little by little, trying to get to the bottom of this and be able to figure it out. There are also about 20 employees, if I remember, Mrs. Rodriguez, about 20 employees who have asked TASB to do a job reclassification. So we're doing that to see where we are on that. But it was a big challenge Again, when I came in to see the difference that we had, again, everyone got a raise, but some got more than others. Then the others that didn't get that raise are complaining, how come I didn't get this? So this is the issue we're having right now.
Well, I was going to ask a question for those folks that are in HR, but Doc, you might have just brought one up, is what do y'all see that we think, or that y'all think that we need to include in a corrective action plan that we need to address for the board to approve? But I think, that's what I thought was, you're right, it was on the whole thing, but that's what I thought was mentioned on that second recommendation regarding pay increase, that exact circumstance, where folks are getting more than what they have to, or that they're supposed to get, or even just mid-contract raises, where you could increase somebody just on the pay grade as it exists. And that doesn't necessarily need board approval because the compensation plan exists that way already. It's allowed.
I think in those cases, though, Mr. Castillo, we always take those to our superintendent.
No, I understand the superintendent, but I think what we need to do is we need to have some type of policies and procedures to ensure that there's, like Board President Sustaita just said, some checks and balances. That's the whole point of the board too, just to ensure that things are done correctly.
You know, I got, I don't even know if I should say this, but, yeah, no, I understand what Trustee Castillo is saying. And I had brought that up one time as too, because realistically, what you're hinting is to is our policies that are in place. Because we saw, you know, I personally saw what one superintendent could do when he kind of just said, hey, I'm gonna do it because I can. And in that situation, it wasn't in the best interest of a lot of staff and, you know, just morale and whatnot. And so we saw the effects of that. It kind of caused a lot of turmoil between August up until all fall, really. It was a huge distraction and an issue. And so it's true. I mean, I didn't know. They even told me, you know, when I was told in not so many words, well, it's a loophole, and I'm allowed to exploit it and use it. And I said, well, you know, the way I took it wasn't lesson learned, right? You learn something every day. So that's when we say compensation updates. I'd really like detailed presentations on what exactly you're updating, because at some point between May and July, I had approved compensation change in the compensation plan, and it wasn't detailed as far as to what I was actually approving. Because technically, me as one board member out of 7, when we approved that compensation plan, we in essence approved raises and whatnot that weren't detailed us. I went back and checked the meetings. Did I miss it? Was it something that was overlooked? No, it wasn't. At that meeting, I was only told of 2 things. One was the athletic stipends that some of the members were asking for. And I remember specifically, they told me the educational stipend increase that I was asking for. All the other items were never said, oh, by the way, this is also happening. And so, you know, Trustee Castillo is right. You know, what do you do as a board? Do you just kind of like take it as a learning lesson and move on? Or do you set policies in place but that'll limit also the power of the superintendent, because the superintendent can move staff at will to positions that are already approved in the compensation plan. He doesn't have to ask for permission and set those salaries then at that point, and also non-contracted. There's individuals that make quite a considerable amount of money here in WISD, 70, 80, 90,000, and they're not Chapter 21 contracts. And those are also at will. So, like I said, it was a learning lesson for me at the time as a new trustee. And, but I agree with Trustee Castillo. What do we do
I
at
think
board level?
what we could do is we could have that worded some way somehow by one of our attorneys to put that into corrective action plan. And when we adopt it, when the board adopts it, it's a policy statement. You know what I mean? That's a directive to the administration that this is what we want to happen. So that's the whole purpose for this exercise, to go over this. But what you presented to us was what the Weaver folks recommended. Is there anything as an administration, and you're not HR, are you?
I am not, but as I started when I began, due to the timeline of this, I just think it was the appropriate thing for me to be the one presenting it. And again, like I said, Mrs. Rodriguez is in collaboration on the answers, so.
You're a good guy.
What we're doing.
Yeah, if HR, if there's anything that you've seen in there that you think that needs some improvements or some recommendations you can make to the board to include in that corrective action plan, because I think it would be good for the board to approve the final draft. But I mean, we're not there every day like you are. So if there's anything in there, and you have a fresh set of eyes too, so that's also a plus.
But one thing I will do, in being transparent, I will bring every pay raise to the board, every new employee to the board, for you to look at and approve. I just have to be transparent.
No, you've been extremely transparent, Dr. Rivera, I'll tell you that. As soon as you got on, with the information you're sharing, organized, structured, and like you said, bringing issues to the board that you didn't really have to, you've been very transparent, so I just
Thank you.
want to say that, thank you.
But not everybody's a Dr. Rivera.
Yes. Exactly.
Thank you, Mr. Benner.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So now, any other questions, discussion? We'll move on, Coach? Okay. We'll move on to the forensic audit report of investigation number 2.
So I wasn't here during that time. But when we start thinking about these processes of purchasing, it's something that, I mean, all CFOs should know. And so what we kind of took it a little bit of different route. So way back when this was first presented to the board, there was already an action plan presented to, on that presentation. So the way we kind of did it this time around is that, again, the action plan is still there. If there was anything to add, we put it in blue.
Awesome.
So that way you could kind of see what was done on day 1 versus day 2. So, and again, I'm going to just summarize for my benefit, so I won't be talking too much. Item number 1 deals with awards and incentives. And so the timeline that we're picking on is 2015 through 20. So we're talking about 5 years, more or less. And during that time, $4.9 million was spent on what we would call awards and incentives. So that includes incentives for our students and also for our staff. And so when that was looked upon, there was some concerns. Some of the things that were implemented at that time that is still continuing on is just to make sure that these incentives are minimal in value. And what we call minimal in value, $25 or less. So if there was something to, in a sense, motivate and show our appreciation to our students or staff, it's a small gift. It's a small token appreciation. So $25 is the limit for that. We are also seeing that some of the items for the students, again, it just depends on what grade level that you're in. Smaller kids, we could actually buy smaller items. So we have that implemented. And so we have that.
Now, just to confirm, it's $25 or less, right?
Yes.
How many times out of the year? Just to confirm.
Per semester.
I will need to follow up and see what that is.
It
I
said
know.
Per semester. Per semester.
Right, that's what it says here, per semester.
Per semester.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Help with clicking. Or can I do that here? Okay. No problem. And so some of the new things that has happened. And so again, one of the items that was talked about was that at the beginning of the budget, so much was allocated for incentives. During the year, additional funds will be allocated. And so we're kind of trying to stop that practice. In other words, work on your budgets, plan it out so that you know that, okay, in the very beginning of the budget time period, you know exactly what's going to be offered to the different staff and students.
Mr. Robledo, will
Yes.
you or your staff provide training to the principals on the budget so that way they know how to allocate to awards incentive and how much they can allocate? So that way they already, ahead of time, like you said, you try to keep it minimal, keep it at one time and don't do the budget amendments, allocate according to your number of students. But if they get trained, then it just makes it a lot easier.
So Thursday, we're having our principals meeting.
Oh, okay.
I'm on the agenda.
Perfect.
And so they're going to get their allocation. I'm going to give a very brief, kind of in-depth kickoff meeting into the
Okay.
budget. Those type of specifics, I'm going to make it my office open saying, if you need some more training on budgets, we have staff. If you want just a quick 30-minute crash course, I could provide that. So we are going to be opening that up for our principals.
Do you all provide training? I'm assuming yes, right? This is probably a yes. There's training provided to the secretaries every year, right? On updates on fiscal management?
So wanted to add, so thank you for bringing up that question. So looking at it from a principal's perspective, then we started looking at this in the summer. We said, look, we need to train our principals and we need to train our secretaries.
Right.
So we had 2 full-blown trainings, one for elementary, and this is a sample of the agenda that we had back on May 30th, and then we had another one on June the 8th. So what we did was we brought in our personnel staff from business office and operations, and each one worked on different areas: campus budget, purchasing policy and procedures, accounts payable, student activity funds, because we wanted to make sure that everyone was in sync on what they were doing.
Right.
But we're continuing with those trainings, which is now what Mr. Robledo's mentioning, they're enhancing them as we move along. So that was very important, that we needed to make sure we got everyone involved in the training process. So, we're moving in that direction.
Okay.
And so some of the other guidelines that were put in place is, or I guess one item that was brought up was that, are we following the procedures that we already have in written purchasing manual? And so they did find some instances where, in a sense, we would have said, for a purchase of over $3,000, please get 3 quotes. Well, they found instances where they just had 1 quote. So again, we're trying to get back to, if we wrote it in our manual, there's a reason why we're trying to do that. So again, our staff is being very diligent and saying, when they review submissions of requisitions, that it does have the required quotes or things of that nature.
This makes me think about us as a board when we go out for, bids or proposals, and you only get one person to come back and say, well, this is what it is. You don't have 2 or 3 sometimes. Sometimes it's just 1. So what happens in those instances where, I just got 1 quote because what happens?
So we have a funny word or funny saying sometimes, and I'm going to make it up. I'm going to buy a pen, and I asked 3 different vendors. If one vendor says, I don't carry that pen, the one you want, I would just say a no bid is still a bid.
Okay.
Now, hopefully the other ones say, yes, we have it, and it's this price, or I could get you at this time. At the end of the day, we are going to approve what we believe is the best value. If you notice, I did not say lowest cost. Sometimes they may say, hey, I'm going to get you this pen for 50 cents, but I'm not going to give it to you until 12 months from now. Well, great on the price, but very bad on time. While the next vendor say, yeah, I'll give it to you for $1, but I'll get it to you tomorrow. Which one will have better value for me in preparing the students with a pen? So there is going to be that fine line that sometimes is not going to be the lowest price being the best value, but we need to document that. And so one thing that we are sharing with our staff is saying, hey, I don't mind paying $1 for the pen as long as I have it documented as to why, because I'm going to get it tomorrow, or the quality, or something. Just a little side note there.
So I'm just reading this once over again, just to make sure. So the recommendation was to give ourselves enough time for, plan ahead for budgeting. Right now, I'm seeing here that the action plan said for future years, if the funds are available, the amount will be added to the initial budget allocation for the schools. That's what we're going to do?
Yes, and so what has happened is that process of giving additional funds in the month of November to pay out in December, that process has stopped, actually. So in other words, we plan on day 1, these are the funds that you're getting, let's work with it and get what we need.
Okay.
We do have another process kicking in place where if we have additional funding because our numbers are so much greater. So for instance, and I'm totally making this up, we have more CADE kids participating in that program. Based on the PEAMS numbers, they're going to get additional monies. Well, we need to make sure that they have the monies now to spend it. So, which is not the same item like how it was happening before. So, but we're not telling them, hey, I'm giving you money today, you need to spend it tomorrow. you have the money today, but it needs to be spent by the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th. So in other words, I'm given sufficient time to purchase whatever the program needs.
What were you encumber? Whatever you purchase, so that, if you have money there, what we should do was we made sure that we got what we needed, and it'd be encumbered, so that when you go into the following year, that money was already spent. And you're paying for things, but that's because we would encumber that, because I got in a situation one time where, for some reason, something wasn't encumbered, and I had to make up a difference of a lot of money. So, that is something that everybody needs to understand.
A lot of it goes to planning, and that's the hard part. And I'm big on athletics, just to make my story easy, because I see Mr. Rodriguez here. So, for instance, if I'm thinking about the football program, do I buy my stuff in August when football starts, or do I buy it today? Technically, I buy it today, so that it takes 12 weeks for it to get here. And so there's budget dollars that I'm actually giving to athletics, which is really, it's stuff I'm going to use for next school year season. But such because there's such a long delay of getting those materials, you kind of have to give the budget dollars now for that sport. And so the same thing happens in the fall. In the fall, I have to buy the items for spring. So it's always like I'm a month or I'm a season behind in that whole sense.
And you have to, because it's very competitive. There are a lot
That
of
too.
school districts in this state, and they're all competing for the same thing, and not just the high school level.
Yeah,
You got your middle schools, you got collegiate, professional, so, yeah.
we're just one of
Very important to-
1,000 school districts here in Texas, and then there is a lot of competition. So again, going back to just being able to just talk about the budget process, to talk about the whole ordering and working with our purchasing department, that's when we're able to make sure that everything.
Did we not
goes
have a
well.
limit before?
I'm sorry?
Did we not have a limit before on what could be spent?
Like,
Like on the incentives?
now it's $25.
But before there wasn't one?
That's gonna be a little harder. I wasn't here.
Not one
and-
enforced.
And that's maybe what was happening.
Jose?
How? I'm gonna pick on the purchasing
see.
person that's here.
He's
Like, why me?
I know.
Well, a lot of times it would be how the principal allocated money for awards and incentives. Then depending on what you're going to spend it on,
Yeah.
then you would allocate money at the beginning of the year according to your budget. So each principal would place a certain amount of money for awards and incentives, and of course, it was approved at the beginning of the year, then you utilize it through the year. Whether it was for, like elementaries, honor roll trophies or ribbons or whatever, but you got it every 6 weeks. So as a principal, you have to allocate that money that you're gonna utilize the whole year.
So maybe instead of putting a cap, because when you do these things, right, sometimes there's a tendency to overcorrect. And then we had to fix it a couple of years later. So I'm looking at it, so it's 4.9, but I thought it was in 1 year. No, this is over 5 years.
It's over 5 years.
So about $1 million
$1 million
a
per
year.
year.
So maybe we capped the budget on it.
So what's happening now? So last year and in this year, the dollar amount has been closer to about $500,000. So half. So that's where, in a sense, that's where the budget dollars are able to be allocated.
And then we let the principals make their own calls on how much to spend.
And the thing is just so not to cross the threshold into gifting, where you're gifting public funds, you know.
That's
you're
the
spending
fine
$1 million,
line.
Yeah, you
And
spend $1
that's
million,
where-
and you're giving away $1 million of merchandise, but yet you got about $1 million allocated for instructional resources. It doesn't make sense. And that was my issue when I came in. I said, okay, this is what we have for instructional resources, but yet you're giving out $1 million away, out of local, state, and federal. I said, so there's issues. And I said, so with the whole, I know kids need rewards, I know staff needs to be recognized, but we also have rules to follow.
Yeah.
And so that was my only concern is, when do you cross the threshold into gifting, or, you know?
And the other thing that kicks in, if it was going to be more than 25, we then have to start taxing. And that's something that we don't want anyone to.
All right, good call,
pursue.
$25 cap, and you don't have to worry about IRS and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Right, the
So that's why.
Well, that's
that
the
part.
maximum threshold, right, 25? Okay.
And so just talking with Bade, Again, the hope was it will always be 25 or minimal, but then there will be times when, oh, it would be nice to get a bag or a polo shirt that's more than $25, or just different things of that nature. Number 2. There we go. And so again, as we talk to the different vendors, the thought is to have the required quotes for items that are over 3,000. So what was happening, 3,000 is that magic number to whether get one quote, if it's under, one quote. If it's over 3,000, then it's 3 quotes. And so throughout in that timeline, there was times when, in a sense, emergencies would occur, and I do put that in quotes. And so one quote was turned in. And so, again, it's a practice that was done in the past. We are getting away from that whole practice. We are also looking into how they were receiving the funds, because that was part of the deal. The monies, a bunch of monies was given during the month of November for the intent for a incentive in December. Again, because of the timeline was so short, the CFO at the time said, you know what, as long as you give me one quote, we're good to go. The thing is, if you're buying so much items, that's where, are you getting the best price? Are you getting the best value?
Right.
Sometimes you won't know because you're only getting one quote. And so, again, we're sticking to our guns. We are trying to get the best value. And so by getting best value means sometimes having to get 3 quotes. It is going to be more work, but it's going to be back to planning and just working with our staff to kind of get that done. Number 3. So there was a time period when, again, everyone will remember what happened in 2018 here in Weslaco. There was a flood, and so there was a number of buses that did get damage, flood damage, things of that nature. We did, in a sense, apply for insurance proceeds. We were able to purchase so many of them. I guess what I want to call it, the better old buses were still kept on in the fleet. The director of transportation at the time decided to do some improvements and maintenance to the old buses, for lack of a better term. And so there was the impression that some of the work was done that necessarily didn't need to happen. Again, we are putting into place and working with the new director of transportation to put together some procedures and manuals together so that we could kind of determine if a bus needs a certain repair, and I'm talking about old buses. So for our district, we have a batch of so many that are built in 2005. We are now 2023, so they're about 18 years old. So really, in our mind, these are just backup buses just for emergencies. They're not to be used in your daily routes for a long period of time because eventually they are going to just break down.
What's the lifetime of a bus or the lifespan?
It all depends. And again, there's 2 ways of thinking. If it is a unleaded type of engine, so in my mind, it's pretty much like a regular vehicle.
Yeah.
My rule of thumb, 10 years. Now, that even could be played with a little bit. In other words, if I have it for a department use, and I'll make it up, assessment, they have a vehicle. Yes, they're going to put miles, but not a lot of miles. Sometimes those vehicles could then now be transferred to maintenance, where, you know what, we don't mind them getting scratched up and beat up. So it prolongs their life. But usually a rule of thumb is 10 years for a regular vehicle. For a diesel engine type of deal, that does have a different lifespan. because some diesel engines could last anywhere from 15 to 20 years. It all depends of how much use, how much wear and tear it has on the, and so 200,000 on a diesel engine, now you're hitting that, okay, it's time to let it go through that whole process of the surplus sale and buy something to replace it.
Who's in charge of transportation currently? Not the actual transportation director, but at the district level. Who oversees that?
I'm overseeing that with Mr. Americo Garza. So currently, to answer some of your questions, we currently have 71 buses that are currently operating right now. 3 of those are the older models, the 2005, the diesel ones that we have. And then we have 55 of those that are 218 or newer, with 13 more being special ed. And that's what we're looking at. So on average, if we're looking at a $100,000 bus in about 10 years, Mr. Robledo was correct, it depreciates about 10% per year. That's what we're looking at right now on the breakdown. So we're looking at those costs to see what's going to be, whether the cost is going to be worth repairing or even looking at the value of everything that we have in place. There's several different operations that we've already addressed. We're looking from everything, as Dr. Rivera mentioned the last time, from overtime, how we're distributing that. So we've been having several meetings on that to discuss all those processes, as well as what we're doing with the maintenance and operation of it.
Is there any type of set policies in place, or not policies, but requirements where you'll say, okay, you know what, thread life on tires, once we hit a certain level, need to be swapped out, brakes, et cetera, things like that? Like, do you have everything said? Is there anything written or said, this is what we're gonna do with our buses? Per those categories, like I said, those that are consistently, I'll say consumables, almost like, parts on a bus, which is like the brakes, tires, et cetera, those type of normal maintenance issues.
They have their internal processes right now, but to have something right now in policy, we don't have that transportation manual.
Right.
But they
In
do,
the manual, that's what I mean, not policy, but say something where you said, this is what we're gonna do, we're gonna make sure that our buses we're swapping out tires once thread life hits excess amount.
correct. So that's something that we're working on, those forms. Right now, we are working closely with our mechanics to make sure that they have a lot of input, and where we're at, how we're moving forward. But, we've been having our meetings and we're discussing on how we want to make sure that we streamline that process, that we can have, better processes in place in that manual.
How many licensed mechanics do we have in the district?
One.
Just one. Is that something that's being looked at, or is that normal for a district of this size and fleet?
We're currently looking at that,
Okay.
But medical,
Yes, good evening, board members. Yeah, we are looking at that. I know that came up during the previous board meeting, and we're looking at the vacancy for another mechanic for that, because we did have a couple of mechanics on there with additional staff assisting. So again, that's part of the staffing assessment that we're doing for the department.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
What about this regulation that's in the action plan? Has that been adopted yet?
I'm sorry, what was that again?
In the action plan, it references a regulation to C and B.
No, that has not been adopted yet. That was something that we were having a discussion. And coming back, I started working with this a few months back. So looking at it was, at the time, we didn't have any buses over that 200,000 threshold or the repair estimates. So that's something that we're going to be looking at, moving forward. Another thing that we're going to be looking at is our fleet, our suburban fleet that we have. So right now, we have 16 suburban fleets. As far as the years of range is from 15 to 2018 that we're looking at, with the lowest being at about 25,000 miles and your highest being at about 71,000 miles. We also have 4 additional vehicles that they're a little older, but they're used throughout our maintenance facilities and transportation department. So those are some of those that we're looking at as well.
Can y'all work on that before the board approves this officially? To
We
get
can.
that, because regulations don't have to be approved by the board, that's just administrative. But so we could say that we're following all the recommendations.
We will. We'll work on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next slide. And so some of the things that we're having to look at is to see how to help with this whole process of determining when a repair or maintenance is needed. And so, again, we are working with our transportation department. So some of the new things that we've been talking about is having, or included already, is that diagnostic service being part of the bid package for whenever we need repairs on buses. And so I know the second comment about a cap, we have not implemented that piece, which is in a sense, and let me just give you an example. So when this vendor was being looked at, it was being spent about 200,000, and I'm rounding up a little, 200,000 in 1 year to do maintenance on buses for the school district. When in previous years, again, I'm using a round number, let's say 50,000. So when you see a jump from 50,000 on average for a particular vendor, then all of a sudden you have a vendor now making 200,000. It does catch the red flags, I guess you could kind of call it. And so one thing that we are talking for transportation, but not necessarily just for transportation, probably in other areas also, is that what would be that that red flag that will happen. And so so once this had occurred, well, we had purchased all these new buses, so the need of I guess working with our old buses really diminished. So the amount of repairs has changed, but now we're thinking, for right now it is because we have all those new 2018 buses. But in time, that eventually those will need to have those major repairs. So we are trying to come up with an additional process, which is what's being listed here. In general, when a particular vendor increases a certain dollar amount or a certain percentage, that it will kind of like, let's not necessarily put on the brakes, but just to have a simple review. What is occurring with that type of process?
Well, was that the issue on that particular item, or was there like a conflict issue, maybe a potential relationship? Was that item?
I believe so.
So, I mean,
There's multiple pieces, and so that's one of the other ones that.
In that circumstance, I mean, what do we make our administrators who have those types of, who has that type of decision-making authority submit conflict disclosures so that you know, or Dr. Rivera knows that there's some relationship there that would bring up the red flag? Because like you said, it's not necessarily the cost. If we need it, we need it. But the whole issue there was, he's giving it to his friend, or he's giving it to his family member, or whatever.
Yeah. So some of the things that pop up is, when does that disclosure need to occur? And so
We can set it up.
yeah. And so, again, thinking about what was probably the practice back then, and I'm kind of using the same ones that we would use for a board member. Do you receive gifts over a certain dollar amount? Do you have a material interest in the company? And so if I read the document right, it didn't have those two items. So again, we just need to write up a different form or have an additional piece that says, okay, is there, I guess,
Yeah, I think,
different items
I
that
think
could
that would
happen.
be important, just so, I mean, if that's the case, so be it, right? But as long as you know, or Dr. Rivera knows, and the board knows, so that there's transparency along with it and a check and balance on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this item is still being looked at.
Right, like I agree
So-
with, I mean, we live in a small community, and we are a small community, and so the chances of people being interrelated or connected somehow are probably high. But at least there's disclosure, and that way it's, if you got nothing to worry about, you know, it can be disclosed, and that's it. We don't have to hear about it later or it come up later as an issue.
To me, I remember something about sequential purchasing along the lines of this paragraph, where, you know, we're just not getting quotes because it's less
Oh, they
than
were
what we
broken
have
down.
to.
Yeah.
Sequential.
So what was happening, again, there is probably a lot more stuff happening, but this vendor just happened to be right across the street of the transportation
Right.
department. So it gave the impression, hey, it's just easier just to work with that one vendor. That was one of the items.
But now, instead of, you know, if we know that we need this much amount, we're not saying, okay, I'm gonna get it this time, you know, 3,000 here and 3,000 here and 2,000. We're not doing that anymore.
We
right?
shouldn't be doing that anymore. And so
We're not
when somebody does
okay.
that, what they're doing is, I'm going to keep it below the threshold. And just, for instance, in the past, we would bring up any item that was over going to be 25,000. But what if I did 24,000 and I did it 10 times? Well, I never
Right.
hit the 25, but cumulatively, we should be checking that also.
Okay.
And so,
I mean, typically, anytime you see something like that, it's a red flag, especially like, say, contracted services, and you see $49,999.
Yeah.
Well, you're trying to stay under 50, right? So that way you don't have to go out and stuff like that. I mean, so those are red flags for the business office and also for board members. So that comes across the table. It doesn't get any,
But we won't see it because it's
yeah.
under.
those
So-
are
Right,
the
well, it won't even
That's
come
why
to
I'm
us.
saying,
In
like,
fact,
it's
you're
not
right. It won't even
happening,
come to
right?
us, but it'll come to administration, but then it always comes
But he
to
says
us.
no.
So,
Yeah.
it's those things where you just gotta be
We have
careful.
some great staff in our purchasing department.
Right.
Again, we are going to be doing some trainings
Okay.
with them too.
Right.
And those, kind of catching those red flags. And
Could
so-
y'all come up with some type of disclosure statement for the folks that are in positions to make these types of decisions? And we can include that in the corrective action plan. That makes sense to y'all, right? I mean, we don't want to bottleneck things either, but we also want to ensure that there's oversight and, transparency and whatnot. So we could have the trust of the community, especially if we're going to go out and ask for a bond. We need to show that we're,
Being transparent.
yeah.
And following through. Yeah, and only because, like I said, we just want everybody to know. So things are changing, policies are changing, the way we operate is changing. And we learn from the past and we keep moving forward, so it's one of those things.
Let
Mr.
me just
Garcia?
make a comment on the sequential purchases or breaking down the purchases to keep them under the 3,000 threshold, not get quotes. Well, that's illegal. Everybody knows that. On repairing any type of equipment, like buses, for example, it's kind of hard to do that. The bus has to repair the engine. It's 16,000, for example, $16,000. And only because, as Mr. Los Santos was saying, that's so much of a red flag, because you would come in for bus number 80, you have one invoice for this much, and you're gonna have them. You're gonna see them really easy. So it's really not, it's hard to do that. That normally occurs when you're buying products, computers, for example, and you're gonna buy $100,000 worth of computers, and you start breaking it down every month so you won't keep it in a threshold. So, but to answer the question, we're not doing that. We're working, we never have, really, unless, are we perfect? No, we're not. But we keep it, we look at that really closely. We return things, we see it. In purchasing, we see it. And so people, if anybody tries to get away with it, it's really not happening. It never, I'm not gonna say it never happened, but if it did, it was very minimal. But not intentionally anyhow.
Okay. Thank you.
And so one of the checks that our auditors would do, but also something that we should be doing in-house, would be to see, are any vendors are also our employees? And if it was disclosed. So it's kind of like, it is okay for that to happen, because it does happen. And so let me give you two examples. So one way it would pop up, let's say I'm an employee and I submitted information for mileage. Mileage is not paid through the accounts, through payroll, it's paid through accounts payable. So technically, when I submit mileage, I would be in that scenario. I'm a vendor because I'm getting mileage, and I'm an employee who gets a payroll check. So we're going to exclude those. So those are not, we're not talking about those. We're talking about, and I'm making it up. Let's say I'm an employee, but I'm also a DJ, and I'm just picking on a DJ. And I go to a campus to provide my DJ services. Now that's a valid way to get. I am a vendor, and I'm also an employee. The thing is, am I disclosing it? And that's where that process may have not been followed all the way through sometimes. And so, but there is checks that we could do on our side. And we do work with our technology department to run those queries to say, hey,
Is there a vendor that also has an employee ID that are the same? And after we sort out all the mileage and those type of reimbursements, those are the ones we're focusing on. And so,
That's very easy. You just need a form. And that's all you have to do.
exactly.
Take care of numbers 5.
And so,
Just develop that form.
exactly. So that's the thing, we're going to be doing that process a little more often.
This has been almost a year. We should have already by now, I would think, have
Right.
done these things. You're not barely researching into it,
Yeah.
but already.
This has
Already
already
been
been
done.
going on. And so luckily,
Yeah.
We made that change on our, we did make that change after the forensic audit, exactly what Dr. Rivera is saying on our form for new vendor forms. We included, are you an employee or not? So if that DJ XYZ wants to be a vendor and fills out that form, he needs to disclose that he's an employee as well. At that point, we'll discuss it and we'll figure out what we're gonna do, whether we're gonna set him up or not. So yes, we have done something so simple as that.
Sounds good.
so in addition, just like how our purchasing manager just shared, it's even part of our new vendor forms. We catch those right off the bat. And so, and if there is, we also include that conflict of interest form. And so again, it's processes that have been changed since that day had occurred. Number 6, it talks about, that systematic processes to ensure that our vendor system is up to date. And so, again, when we have vendors who have been entered, there's updates that occur, and especially when vendors are not even being used, we have that timeline where if you are in the system and in the past 18 months we haven't bought anything from you, we would then inactivate just to kind of clean out the system in a sense. And so that process is going to be done every semi-annual year, so that we could say every 6 months we're doing this review. And so, yes. And so, I just see that little extra blue part. And so whenever, let's say I'm the DJ that got deactivated after 18 months, in a sense, you just fill out the vendor form all over again to get reactivated.
Is that actual pen and paper, or can they do it online?
It is a paper and pencil type of thing, and then they submit that to us.
Because I've heard of a lot of other districts, I think we're way behind on that area. Everybody else does it electronically. Why have we not moved towards that?
Because you only hired me 2 months ago. We're going to start tomorrow. No, it's just, let me make sure. We don't do it electronically, right?
Okay, if I understand the question correctly, you're asking if vendors, why not give the vendors the option to get into our system and change their address or?
Not into
Or
your
to become a
system, but
vendor?
just submit their information to you electronically, some way
What do you
instead of
do?
having to come by.
Like their bid?
Kind of like
Yeah.
a bid or a vendor.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah, I think you're talking more on the bid side, where they go and they set themselves up as a vendor, and then they can retrieve any bids or submit any proposals as well. We don't have that yet. It's something we've been talking about for years, actually, even before the forensic audit, if you want to know the truth. We just, for one reason or another, we just never looked into it. Or not that we didn't look into it, we just never initiated it. And then we ran into the cost. It was always a cost situation. I think I looked into it, and it's like a total 50,000, give or take, probably a little more now with the cost of everything going up. You know, at the time we wanted to implement it, we looked at it seriously right as COVID hit, because you know, it was hard. Nobody's coming into the office, but that was even harder. Not being in the office, not having all the personnel and stuff like that. But it is something we're going to look at. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
David and I talked about it, and we're going to try to initiate an RFP just to see what's out there, a proposal, just
Right.
to see what's out there and the cost. And if it works, not that if it works, but if it works for us, then,
Well, if it's working for a lot of others.
It is.
Maybe it's
A
the
lot of-
efficiency and that the cost is gonna make up for,
true.
everything else.
There,
There's something.
there, a lot of districts have already implemented that, and you're right, we are behind in that respect. I mean, no bones about it, we're behind. If we can get it going, we will here in the near future.
Yeah, let's get it going.
Yes, sir.
I don't mind spending the money. It's gonna make our job easier and faster and quicker and efficient.
And we did have it in the Alio system. It did have that module. Unfortunately, they never got it off the ground the way we wanted it. And when I made contact with them, they said it was going to take a year or longer to try to get it up to speed. We just don't have that time, so we'll move on.
Let's look
Yeah,
into it.
that's-
Yes, sir.
That's,
Yes.
move on.
And there's a process for
Right.
online. And so I implemented there in Donna, and we already had it in Brownsville. And it's the same vendor. So again,
Is it ION? Is that what it's called?
Iron Wave. Yeah. So that's just one vendor. Again, we
Okay.
will do the process and all that good stuff. But I'm familiar with that process.
Okay, that'll be good.
And yes. Number 7. And so as we look into the formal process of what it takes to become a actual vendor or an approved vendor in our system, there has been processes in place even before the forensic audit, but I'm going to kind of pick on the new stuff, which is that blue part. And so we do have staff in our department who that is what their sole or one of their major duties is, to make sure that the vendors who are up for renewal, in other words, I'm going to do my office supplies. Well, what vendors do we look at? There's going to be one person, and that's their main job, to make sure that we inform all of those vendors we're up for a bid. 5 days before the actual bid is due to the district, they're going to send out that nice little reminder. If you are interested, please submit a bid. Now, we use the files that we have on at that time. If the vendor does not update their files with us, and let me give you an example. Let's say the purchasing person at vendor so-and-so, he moves on and goes somewhere else, and nobody tells the district, hey, use this other email. Again, our information is only as good as what the vendor shares with us. And so, but the hope is that we try to get the most participation. And so that's the goal and ongoing goal. If you ever wonder who was awarded for whatever bid that the district has previously awarded, it's on our website. And so, again, it's something that has been utilized for years and years. We're just making sure that, or we're just ensuring that that practice is still ongoing. So all of our purchasing bids, current and awarded, is on our purchasing website. So some of the issues that do pop up is that staff is just not aware of how to use the software. And so some of the things that we are doing in-house is that, again, just like how we have one person who's kind of in charge of making sure all the bidders are up to date, we have other staff who does training for all of the district staff. Not all staff use the Alio system, but those that do, they have the opportunity to just reach out to the purchasing department and say, hey, I'm the new hire, I am now in this position, and I need to be able to actually use the software. Again, COVID kind of threw things off, but now we're back, everyone's back in the office. We actually have, in this next month and a half, 4 trainings scheduled. And so whether it's going to be talking about new to the software, like I just don't know anything about it, or they just have different key topics, there is going to be opportunities for staff to get trained. And so again, that's the good work from our purchasing department. And that's what the blue parts are just sharing, that we wish we could make these mandatory, but we know that there's just so many things going on at the campus site or department. But we are going to be having these trainings, live trainings. I know sometimes it'll be good to have like a video training. Sometimes questions are asked and we answer for a very specific set of scenario. So I hate to like give you a generic answer when it was something for a specific question, and it just kind of like it changes when you give me different scenarios. So we just tend to say, you know what, we're just going to make ourselves available and have live trainings, and so that is the goal for ourselves. So this is one thing that we are going to be checking with our superintendent to see how we would go with this option of having a fraud hotline. And so I know there's services that we could just purchase that says it's a totally anonymous type of software, or where people can make those outcries. And so we will be working with the superintendent on this.
I had mentioned, I think, to Mr. Martinez back in 2020 when I first came on, I liked how Harlingen ISD, and they have that app, you know, the Harlingen CISD app. And I don't know if we had said, well, we'll look into it. But then, you know, things happen. Can we look into something like that?
As an app, I can always check with
I mean, even
technology.
kids now, you know, even kids know how to make apps, and those electronic or whatever technology classes they have. It's just, I think it would be very nice to have that Weslaco ISD app and have something like this hotline, the way the Crime
Just to be part of
Stoppers,
that
you know,
whole-
or news. Or there's just so many things on those apps that are really neat that we could implement along with this right here.
I know the easier thing to do is what we currently have, which is all the different, like, oh, let me do Instagram and Twitter and all those.
Yeah.
To do an app, I know I had tried to do that at another district. It was a little harder than what it was, but again.
Well, how about we just put on our website, you could report this and just have an email.
A link. And that's how I'm seeing it, where it's
I get that, but now people have a phone. You don't want to go through WISD website and look for the email. Like, people just open an app now, and here you go. Let me just, my WISD app, I downloaded it, and the little, I don't know if you've seen a Harlingen one. It's really neat.
It was a Stop It. That was the app for.
Probably just buy it.
Especially for students.
Yeah.
To let administrators know anything that was happening on campus or whatever. Yeah.
Mr. Carlos,
So
how
we could
soon
look at
can
other
we,
districts, and then we could.
Yeah.
come
Mr.
up
Carlos,
with
how
the
soon can we
options.
implement this?
Yeah, because that's an easy one too.
Yes? Okay. And we'll put that as one of our findings, what we're gonna do to it.
Yeah, it would be nice if most of these things could be ongoing or done by the time the board approves
Yes,
it.
yes.
Yeah, that was.
Let's see.
I'll send you the app so you can see it now. It just makes it so much more
I'm
convenient.
sure you could
for-
just buy it from, probably a vendor.
And now, but I'm just thinking about, I mean, we wouldn't want kids to do, right? But obviously nowadays, all these classes that we offer these kids, they learn how to do these things. And I don't know, use what we have already, use our resources and people who know how, teachers that know how to do this or something, and get that done. That would be nice.
We were doing this 10 years ago, I remember, with the hotline.
Yeah.
Remember, Mr. Abel, the hotline for discipline, for anyone that would call?
Yes.
Just for different things, Mr. Nieto?
Correct.
We were doing this 10 years ago. Let's stay that one.
So, Madam Board President and Dr. Rivera, and the board, if you guys are okay with this, I think it would be good if the board were to, if this could be worded in a way that's adoptable by the board. You know what I mean? As opposed to a report to the board, but like adoptable, like the verbiage and stuff. And if the board adopts it, then we could post it on our website, and then perhaps have maybe every 6 months a review of how we're going as far as doing or implementing the corrective action plan, or if we have to modify it based on our circumstances at the time. You know what I mean? Because things change. Remember, sometimes we have a tendency to overcorrect sometimes, and sometimes there's no need to be so harsh or whatnot or whatever. But I think if it's okay with the board, we could adopt this at our next board meeting, and then just plan to have, maybe review status every 6 months. Is that okay?
Definitely,
I
sounds
like,
good.
like that idea.
This is the act on reporting.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I have seen something like that, yeah. You downloaded it, or you
Yeah, I had it already. We downloaded it. YouTube, calendar, everything but for us.
Cool.
That's our report.
Well,
All
thank
right,
you.
any other questions, discussions? Thank you very much, appreciate it. I know you guys put a lot of time into this, so thank you so much. Very informative.
Doc, we could have this at the March meeting on the
Yes.
27th?
Okay, that
You
brings
want
us,
it under consent or discussion and action?
It depends on how, I think, I mean, up to the board, but I would think how long they could get us the draft so the board could review prior to the meeting. If we
Okay.
get it like right before, then maybe for discussion, but if we get it with a little bit of time, maybe
Okay.
do a
maybe
consent.
discussion, just so we can look
Discussion.
over it and.
Well,
yeah.
and adoption,
And
discussion
and
and
action.
And action.
Do it.
Okay, there's no further questions or comments. Item number 5, which is adjournment. It is 7:49 PM. And just for the record, Mr. De Los Santos left the meeting at 7:34 PM. Do you guys need a little break before the meeting? Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. We have a training, but I guess someone's. Yeah, we can.